The invitation stated, Miss Rebecca Carter. My name was misspelled. I once commanded a NATO mission, but now I find myself as the overlooked sister. It wasn't just the title that hurt, though it felt like a small, sharp jab. It was the way it was presented that truly pierced through. Gold-foiled swirly cursive, churned out like a generic grocery store sympathy card. The type that lacked a personal touch, simply knowing it needed to be dispatched. I stood in my kitchen, my boots still laced from the morning drills, gazing at the envelope as if it held the power to offer an apology. It simply didn't. I turned it around. No note, simply a monogram. C. and Andrew. As if the mere presence of those initials could truly validate the extravagance of the entire affair. I opened it with caution, not from nostalgia, but simply because it was what I always did. We learned that lesson well. Never delve into anything unless you were certain of what lay within. The cardstock within was sturdy enough to withstand a bullet's impact, adorned with a delicate watercolor depiction of a vineyard nestled in Sonoma. Of course, it's Charlotte's engagement party. I went over the details 3 times. Just to reiterate, Saturday at 5:00 p.m. at the family estate. Attire for the occasion is formal garden wear. And beneath that, in elegant handwriting, we eagerly anticipate celebrating with those who mean the most to us. Everyone who holds significance. The stillness enveloped the room, wrapping it in a heavy blanket of quiet. Only the gentle tick of the clock and the soft, persistent hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. There was no trace of fragrance, no candles lit, only a bit of detergent in the remnants of this morning's physical training. I reached for my phone resting on the counter and dialed Sarah's number. She answered on the very first ring. I understand, I replied. A moment of stillness hung in the air. Once again, they got the name wrong, didn't they? Indeed, a more extended pause. They remembered. They were wiped away. I released a breath that felt like a silent rebellion, pushing against my ribs with unspoken intensity. Sarah spoke in a gentler tone now. You have no obligations to them. Beck, I understand. I truly mean it. You granted them 2 decades of quietude. That's far beyond what they ever offered you. I settled onto the edge of the counter stool, allowing the envelope to sit next to a pile of mission folders. It stood there, vibrant and striking, an unexpected burst of color, in a setting filled with tension and seriousness. Charlotte once confided in a colleague, I only handle administrative tasks in the military. I replied, as if I handle invoices. Just last week, I unraveled a network breach that had the potential to bring down 2 drones in flight. Initially, Sarah remained silent. In her reality, honesty holds no value. Your presence threatens her reputation. I shut my eyes. In reality, I had convinced myself that this would no longer hold any significance. Their absence from my commissioning ceremony, due to Charlotte's wine tasting that weekend, had cut the last remaining connection. Yet it had not. The bond they formed didn't encircle them. It enveloped me instead. I rose to my feet and pulled open the closet next to the kitchen. My uniform was placed with meticulous care, just as I had left it. Stressed, prepared. The emblem on the chest glimmered under the kitchen light. I let my fingers glide over the fabric that brought a sense of calm I knew so well. It had witnessed arid landscapes, tempests, heartache, and it had always been there for me. Yet, they were not worthy of witnessing me in that state. They had no right to take credit for what that uniform had achieved. I folded it with a gentle touch, taking my time, honoring its significance, returned it to the closet. Then I turned toward my drawers and pulled out a simple, fitted navy blue dress, understated and serene. There would be no awards, no rank, just presence, and that would be enough. My phone buzzed. A message from Sarah. She placed you next to the caterers. Again, of course she did. I smiled, not with bitterness, but something colder, sharper. I grabbed my coat keys in the envelope. As I stepped toward the door, I whispered into the still air, let them underestimate me. They always do. I arrived before the guests, yet somehow they'd already made me invisible. The driveway was empty when I pulled up, not a single luxury SUV in sight. Just rows of lavender hedges trimmed within a millimeter of conformity. The house stood like a photograph, perfect from far away, sterile. Up close, Charlotte's Boston mansion was always more set design than home, curated to impress, arranged to control. Every shrub knew its place better than I did. I rang the bell once. The chime was crisp hollow, a sound designed to echo, not too welcome. Marilyn opened the door. Her silk blouse shimmered like armor, and her smile was airbrushed into her cheekbones. "You came," she said, voice as smooth as the glass of rosé, already in her hand. How brave. Brave, as if I'd walked into a war zone rather than my sister's house. Maybe, in a way I had. "I got in early," I said, keeping my tone even. "Didn't want to miss anything." She stepped aside. "Well, the florist is running late. Maybe you can help Charlotte with the centerpieces." I nodded once. Automatic. No surprise there. The foyer was drenched in polished marble and fresh-cut hydrangeas. A framed photo of Charlotte and Jonathan sat on the entry table. Their smiles were glossy. Her hand rested delicately on his chest like a campaign poster for upper-crust romance. Beneath it, a plaque. "Gratitude is the mark of grace." Charlotte must have bought it after her gratitude campaign went viral. "She's in the sunroom," Marilyn added, already walking away. The sunroom smelled like eucalyptus and subtle manipulation. Charlotte was perched on a high-back chair, phone in one hand, a lavender ribbon in the other. "Rebecca," she said without looking up. "You made it." I smiled politely. "Wouldn't miss it." She gestured to a list on the table. "Your room's the one next to the garage. It's a little snug, but we save the better suites for the out-of-towners." "You understand." "I always do," I said. "Jonathan's parents are flying in this afternoon. We gave them the East Wing." "The East Wing." Naturally. I wondered what that made my section. "The loading dock." She finally looked up. Her eyes skimmed over me like I was a detail she'd already checked off. "That dress is sensible." "That's what the tag said." She didn't laugh, just returned to her ribbons. Guests began arriving soon after. The doorbell became a metronome of social climbing. Marilyn floated through the house, air-kissing and wrist-touching, distributing compliments like bribes. Charlotte adjusted her posture and dialed up the warmth, her voice shifting into PR mode. Someone handed me a tray of glass vases. "Could you carry these to the back table?" No one asked if I had a free hand. No one noticed that I didn't belong to the staff. By the time the second round of guests arrived, my job had expanded to coordinating the napkin colors. Charlotte didn't assign it, but when no one else moved, I did. That's how I became useful, by noticing what others ignored. At one point, Marilyn introduced me to a couple from the vineyard. "This is Rebecca," she said, with a condescending lilt. "She works in admin for the government." I raised an eyebrow. "Strategic operations." The woman blinked. "Oh, so like files. Files that guide mission logistics." "But yes, files." They nodded slowly. Politely, I was the paperclip in a room full of diamonds. Charlotte came over shortly after. Her voice was syrupy, her smile weaponized. "Rebecca works with files and reports," she said, waving a vague hand. "But important ones, I'm sure." I kept my smile fixed. I'd heard it all before. In high school, she told her friends I did something with spreadsheets and secrets, like I was a glorified receptionist for the CIA. From across the room, I spotted a woman aim her phone in my direction. The screen lit up. Camera focus. A second later, she lowered it and tapped twice, delete. I wasn't worth the storage space. I didn't move, didn't react, just sipped my sparkling water and adjusted a vase by half an inch. They wanted me to be furniture. Decorative, silent, easily cropped. But I knew better, because furniture doesn't watch. Furniture doesn't remember. And furniture doesn't build strategy while holding a tray of vases. The woman with the phone glanced up and caught my eye. She flinched just slightly and turned away. It was a small win, but I'd take it, because while they posed for photos, I was positioning myself, and one day they'd realize I'd been in the frame all along, just out of focus by their own design. In the photo from Charlotte's graduation, I'm only a shoulder and a sliver of hair. The rest cropped out like I never quite belonged. I stood in the upstairs hallway alone, the soft creak of old floorboards underfoot, the only sound accompanying me. The air smelled faintly of lemon oil and expensive forgetfulness. Along the wall, a gallery of triumphs stretched from floor to ceiling, a curated history in gold leaf frames. Charlotte, in her valedictorian sash. Charlotte breaking the ribbon at her first half marathon. Charlotte at a podium, hand raised in mid-speech, like she was born mid-applause. And then halfway down the line, I found it, her college graduation photo. Harvard, of course. The camera had captured her at the center, radiant in crimson and black, tossing her cap with theatrical joy. To her left, Dad beamed one arm around her, the other raised in a proud salute. Marilyn stood on the right chin, lifted in a graceful smile, and behind them, barely visible, cropped so tightly it could have been by accident, if not for the pattern, a half shoulder, a sliver of brunette hair. Me, I leaned in as if by squinting, I could bring the missing part of myself back into the frame. But it was gone, like always. I hadn't been asked to take the photo. I'd leaned in late, literally and metaphorically. I'd arrived from a training rotation in Fort Gordon red-eye flight. No makeup boots, still dusty. I remembered thinking, at least I made it. That had felt like enough. It never was. My hand brushed against the frame, and something in me itched. A memory I hadn't touched in years stirred. A silver bracelet, a birthday gift from my mother. The real one, the one before Marilyn. I had worn it every day until it vanished at summer camp, the year I turned 12. I cried for 3 days. Sure, someone had taken it. Or worse, thrown it away. No one looked, no one asked. Probably got lost in the woods. Dad had said, "Let it go, Rebecca." But I never had. I moved slowly toward the guest room, the one they assigned me near the garage. The dresser was mostly empty, save for a single drawer that stuck slightly as I pulled. Inside a tangle of forgotten things, spare ribbon, a cracked hairbrush, old holiday cards, some half-melted wax sachets. And there, tucked in a crumpled cloth napkin, was the bracelet, tarnished, bent slightly at the clasp, but unmistakably mine. My breath caught in my throat. I reached for it with fingers I hadn't realized were trembling. The metal was cool and familiar. My name was still etched faintly on the inside, though the letters had worn thin with time. They hadn't thrown it away. They'd just hidden it. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at it, years collapsing into a quiet, dense ache. Not anger, not yet. Something softer, sadder, a confirmation of something I'd always known but never said aloud. "You didn't throw it away," I whispered, voice tight. "You just hid it." Behind me, the hallway buzzed faintly with voices. Laughter floated up the stairs, as if the party below were happening in a different reality, one where I didn't exist or never had. I slipped the bracelet into my pocket and stood. Something in the corner of the closet caught my eye. A small cardboard box marked in black Sharpie, Rebecca Junk. The word punched harder than expected. I knelt and opened it. Inside, a faded pencil sketch I'd drawn at 15, a woman in uniform, faceless, but with posture precise as steel. A music medal I'd won in 8th grade, still looped on a red ribbon, and at the bottom, folded neatly, a page torn from a yellow legal pad. I unfolded it. It was a draft, a field report. I'd never submitted early training exercise simulation data, annotated by hand in green ink. My ink, I remembered this. I'd written it after a 36-hour shift, then decided it was too rough, not good enough to turn in. Somehow, it had ended up here. They'd kept it. Or maybe again, they'd just never thrown it out. I sat back on my heels, the bracelet now heavy in my pocket, the field report in my hands. None of this was dramatic. No screaming, no doors slammed. Just small, deliberate acts of erasure. Photos cropped, things misplaced, labels written in Sharpie. Not hated, just managed, contained, kept quiet. I folded the paper again and tucked it back into the box. The wind rattled faintly against the window pane, as if trying to remind me something else was waiting. And it was because somewhere inside this house, beneath the curated light, I was starting to find the shadows they couldn't quite hide. I've led command rooms with satellite uplinks and classified strike orders. Tonight, I'm topping off Chardonnay. The stemware clinked lightly as I moved between clusters of manicured guests, their laughter effervescent as the wine. My left hand held the neck of the bottle with a steady grip, the same hand that had once mapped evacuation routes in Kandahar. Now it tilted gracefully to refill Mrs. Green's glass as she giggled about the imported orchids on the mantel. Charlotte's main event hall was bathed in sunset light, diffused through gauzy drapes, golds and creams and carefully arranged hydrangeas, turned the room into a spread from a lifestyle magazine. A string quartet played near the fireplace, just soft enough to suggest money, just loud enough to drown subtle discomfort. Champagne towers glittered like threats. I wore navy again, civilian, unadorned, purposefully quiet. Marilyn passed me trailing peony perfume in a tray of amuse-bouches. She didn't say thank you, just nudged the tray closer and whispered, "They're low near the patio. You're good at organizing." Organizing. I nodded once and moved as asked. To them, my aptitude for logistics was not a sign of strategic mind. It was domestic demure. Charlotte had once told a friend in front of me, "Rebecca likes instructions. She was born to serve, not lead." And yet here I was, leading the efficient movement of finger foods across enemy territory. From across the room, I saw Sarah. Just a glimpse. Her hair darker now, tied in a tight bun, standing near the entryway. Her eyes found mine for a split second, and I saw it, the tension she carried on my behalf. She raised her glass in the smallest gesture. I nodded back. We wouldn't speak tonight. Not yet. A new wave of applause swept through the room like a stage tide. Charlotte stood at the center, radiant, in pale green silk, holding Jonathan's hand like he was both her prize and her announcement. "And here he is," she said, beaming. Jonathan McAllister. Decorated, beloved, perfect. Laughter, clinking. Marilyn dabbed at her eyes with a cloth napkin, as if the moment were too overwhelming to process with dry tear ducts. Jonathan smiled modestly, shook hands, accepted praise. He looked polished, yes, but not soft. His posture was military, even when still, and then his eyes moved. "They found me." He excused himself gently and walked toward the refreshment table toward me. I adjusted the bottle in my hand and turned slightly ready to pour another glass. But he didn't reach for one. He just stopped 2 feet away. We stood in the center of floral extravagance, eyes locked. There was no smile, no question, just silence. I didn't flinch. He looked at me with a kind of restrained calculation. Not confusion, not suspicion, recognition. And it didn't look new. It looked remembered. Then Charlotte appeared at his side, looping an arm through his. "Oh," she said with casual dismissal. "Ignore her. She's been odd lately." I didn't move. Neither did Jonathan. Charlotte tugged lightly on his sleeve. He blinked, turned, and let her lead him away. But just before they disappeared into the circle of admiring guests, he paused, glanced back, and said just loud enough for only me to hear a soft murmur laced with something almost reverent awe. "Carter in a house that buried every trace of me. They somehow kept the one thing that proved I existed." The attic door creaked like it hadn't been touched in years. Dust spiraled in shafts of weak light, filtering through a narrow window pane. The air smelled of forgotten summer cedar trunks, old wool, a perfume bottle long since dried out. I climbed slowly, the field report tucked beneath my arm like a relic. The box marked Rebecca junk had been shoved behind Christmas decorations and boxes of Charlotte's childhood trophies. And there, underneath a pile of outdated tech manuals and a cracked violin case, I'd found it. The report, a single copy, my handwriting precise, controlled, dated, and stamped Operation Cold Moon. Draft R. Carter. I hadn't remembered keeping a physical version. I didn't remember leaving it behind. But then again, what else had they quietly cataloged while pretending I didn't exist? I crouched beside an old chest and opened the first page. My notes ran margin to margin. Intercepted radio traffic satellite coordination markers. Risk assessment models. I could almost feel the desert heat pressing through the page. My fingers traced the edge of the paper as if contact would make it easier to breathe. And then I saw it. Near the bottom of page 3, written in red ink. "This saved us." Who wrote it? I froze. The handwriting was sharp, slanted, disciplined, but fast, like someone thinking too quickly to write neatly. I knew that script. I'd seen it on training rosters, mission briefings, strategy notes scrawled across dry erase boards. Jonathan McAllister. He had read it, not just read-annotated it, respected it, sought the author. I leaned back on my heels. The silence of the attic pressed around me. It wasn't empty here. It was full with all the things they didn't say, all the things they had quietly kept. The pages fluttered under my hand, but I didn't turn them. My eyes burned not with tears, but with something deeper recognition. I hadn't been just a name on a draft. I had been the ghost in the machine, the whisper in their headset that helped them survive. And he remembered. My breath slowed. My heart didn't. The memory came back like a sucker punch the night I wrote that report. A tent in the back perimeter of Kandahar, tip 14 a.m. My back hunched over a satellite feed, everyone else asleep or too angry to speak. We'd lost 3 in an ambush. I blamed myself for decrypting too late, for hesitating, for not flagging a phrase buried in a static, choked intercept. I'd written that report in a fog of failure. I wasn't supposed to submit it, but I needed to document the lapse, needed to own the damage. And then I hadn't. I'd folded it, tucked it in my pack, and convinced myself it didn't matter. Sarah had found it a week later. She'd held it up to the light and said, "Even ghosts leave footprints. Rebecca, that report is yours, whether or not you think you deserve it." At the time, I dismissed her. Now in this attic with Jonathan's handwriting staring back at me, I knew she was right. Voices filtered up from below. A clink of glasses. Laughter. Someone called out, "Sir, we're ready for the toast." Jonathan. He was looking for someone. I closed the folder slowly, hands still tight, and pressed it against my chest. The weight of it settled just below my collarbone. Heavier than it should have been, more real than anything in this house had ever felt. My voice cracked, the silence so soft even I barely heard it. He knows he once signed his life to a mission he barely survived. Tonight, he signs a name beneath my field report. The study was dimly lit, tucked between the garden doors and the sunken library Charlotte had refurbished last fall. It wasn't meant for guests. But Jonathan wasn't a guest anymore. He was family, or so they said. He shut the door gently behind him, blocking out the laughter and clinking cutlery. The party was thinning, the champagne turning flat. A jazz record, smooth vintage, probably. Marilyn's played softly through the house speakers. It sounded like a lie, pretending to be calm. He placed a folder on the desk, leather-bound, military standard, inside old NATO briefings, crumpled mission maps. A page yellowing at the corners. He flipped through them with care, but urgency crept in at the edges of his movements. Then he found it a loose page tucked between reports. The ink was faded but distinct. Field memo, anonymous, lines underlined in red, satellite pattern logic, terrain overlays. The code name at the top read, Operation Cold Moon. His hand hesitated. He pulled a separate page from the inner pocket of his jacket, the one from the attic. Rebecca's draft. He placed them side by side. The handwriting matched, not just in shape, but in rhythm, the way the lowercase r dipped slightly. Left the numbers written, with the 0 closed, like a command. He'd seen thousands of memos, dozens of hands. This one had haunted him. For 5 years, he'd carried the annotated page. He'd asked once quietly if anyone knew the author. No one did. Or they claimed they didn't. It was just a report. They said another nameless briefing that happened to be right. Except it wasn't just right. It had saved 2 squads from a misdrop, including his own. He pulled out his phone and stepped into the corner, shielding the screen from the flickering light. Scrolled to the name, tapped. Sarah picked up on the 3rd ring. "I'm at the house," he said without greeting. "Thought you might be," she replied. "I found the report. Hers. It's her handwriting. It's always been hers, hasn't it?" There was a pause, the kind you use to take a breath before walking into a fire. "Yes," Sarah said. "That report saved 2 squads, including yours." He exhaled once, a sound like something lifting or breaking. She never said a word. "She doesn't need to," Sarah said. "But maybe you do." He ended the call without goodbye. Downstairs, the house hummed with the energy of a party pretending not to be over. People posed near the floral arch Charlotte had installed for photos. Jonathan moved through them with purpose, expression unreadable, the paper folded clean, tucked into the inside of his suit, pressed against his chest like a pact. The photographer called for the full family group. Charlotte took center position without prompting. Marilyn adjusted the train of her dress. Dad smoothed his tie, expression glazed with practiced pride. Rebecca stood to the side near the edge of the frame. Not quite in, not quite out. Jonathan approached slowly, not saying a word. His presence alone made space bend. People stepped aside without realizing it. He didn't speak to her, didn't make a gesture, just stood nearby as the shutter clicked again and again. A quiet disruption, a fact too large to ignore. The photographer asked for smiles. Jonathan didn't. Rebecca turned slightly, sensing him, but not moving. As the photo session ended, the crowd began to peel away, to cake to whiskey, to exits. He stepped closer carefully. She didn't notice him at first. Then the brush of paper into her coat pocket. Soft, deliberate. He leaned in, voice low enough to get past her defenses. In case you forget who you are. And then he walked away. No fanfare, no applause, just clarity. They toasted to Charlotte's career, Dad's golf score, and even the new drapes. They skipped the woman who saved a base from bombing. The main dining hall shimmered with effort. Velvet drapes framed tall windows, like gowns awaiting movement. Chandeliers glittered above a long mahogany table, so polished I could see the reflection of my own clenched jaw. Around me, wine glasses waited in symmetrical alignment. Butter-soft lamb chops were plated beside heirloom carrots, braised to submission. Perfection on the surface. Charlotte rose, first glass in hand. The room stilling as if on cue. Her smile could have passed for warm if you didn't know how it was built. I want to thank you all, she began, for joining us tonight. It's been a year of incredible achievements. Mom's charity exceeded its fundraising goals. Dad finally broke 90 on the golf course. Laughter. Genuine? And of course, she added, pausing for effect, we finalized our Series C funding. So next quarter, the firm will expand into Geneva. It's been humbling. There was applause. Light, elegant. I sipped my wine, not tasting it, and none of it, she continued, would be possible without this family. She placed a hand on Marilyn's shoulder. Marilyn beamed as though christened. Jonathan sat quietly beside her, his expression unreadable. Then came Dad. He stood slowly, a little too proudly, lifting his glass. And let's not forget Rebecca. He said, his tone as nonchalant as someone remembering to thank the florist. Always been quiet, good with numbers. A few polite nods followed. Then someone, a woman in golden pearls, tilted her head and asked, so you're like military admin? I turned to her. I design operations, I said evenly. Silence followed. Not shocked disinterest, as if I'd said I alphabetized disaster. Someone coughed. A fork scraped porcelain. Charlotte cleared her throat, theatrically raising her glass again. And who knows, she said, eyes twinkling with amusement. Maybe next year Rebecca can help plan our honeymoon logistics. Laughter rippled. Light, dismissive. The kind that didn't land hard enough to bruise, just enough to remind you not to stand up. I didn't flinch. I reached for my water. My hand didn't shake. And then Jonathan stood, fork in hand, unsmiling. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't list my rank. Someone else did. And the room cracked open. The clink of silver on porcelain filled the hall as dessert plates were laid down. Vanilla bean panna cotta trembled on fine china, untouched, as guests leaned back in their chairs with the comfort of satisfaction. Laughter dimmed into murmurs. The candlelight softened everything except me. I sat still, spying straight hands, resting calmly in my lap. The humiliation from moments ago still lingered like smoke. Charlotte had taken her final jab, and the room had giggled on cue. Dad had offered his usual backhanded nod to my existence, and I, true to form, had said nothing. Jonathan stood. The motion was quiet, deliberate, but it cut through the room like a change in air pressure. He tapped his glass once with the back of his fork. The sound wasn't loud, but it stilled conversation. Before we enjoyed dessert, he said, voice calm but resonant, I'd like to take a moment. People turned, brows lifted. Charlotte looked puzzled, but smiling, prepared to recenter attention. Jonathan didn't smile. I want to thank someone in this room. He continued, looking not at Charlotte, but around the table, letting the tension tighten with each breath. Someone who saved me. And others, someone whose work kept us alive. A confused chuckle rose. Marilyn tilted her head. Oh, Jonathan, she said lightly. Surely you mean Charlotte's. But he raised his hand, silencing her. He turned. General Carter, he said clearly, eyes locked on mine. I failed to salute you earlier. Forgive me. And then he did. A crisp, perfect salute, straight-backed, formal, unwavering. The room didn't just fall silent. It fractured. Gasps followed like aftershocks. Marilyn's wine glass tipped sideways and shattered against her plate. Charlotte's mouth parted, lips trembling in disbelief. Dad dropped his fork, the clatter loud in the dead air. Someone whispered, She's a general? Across the room, a man in uniform. I hadn't realized he was military stood slowly, then another. Both men snapped into salute. The world tilted. I didn't move. I looked Jonathan in the eye, held it, then slowly, I reached for my glass of water, took a sip, let the moment stretch, and finally I spoke. "Sit down, Colonel," I said evenly. No need for ceremony. It was just a mission. His hand dropped, but he didn't sit. He stood in the storm he'd summoned and let the silence hang. No one finished their panna cotta. The silence tasted sharper than the wine. The once golden dining hall now felt overexposed, like a stage left too long. Under the lights, after the actors had fled, forks hovered above untouched desserts. Hands fidgeted with napkins. Eyes darted like moths, looking for an exit. No one spoke first. The silence wasn't just awkward. It was seismic. It shifted tectonic plates beneath every smile that had dismissed me, every toast that had excluded me. I didn't move. I let it settle. Marilyn perched 2 seats to my left, leaned slightly toward Charlotte, and hissed under her breath. This was not on the script. Charlotte didn't respond. Her gaze remained fixed ahead, mouth still slightly open. A tremor in her fingers betrayed the stillness she worked hard to maintain. Jonathan had sat back down, posture composed, face unreadable. He didn't speak again. He didn't need to. Dad exhaled finally, the breath shaky, barely audible. He reached for his wine, missed the glass, then tried again. When he finally looked at me, his eyes were not angry or ashamed. They were simply vacant, like a man blinking through smoke. Charlotte cleared her throat, voice thin and forced. "But Rebecca's always been shy, right?" She attempted a smile, but it crumbled before it landed. From the far end of the table, a voice cut through the quiet like a blade. "Mamet said I've briefed under her. She ran a 3-theater coordination from Germany last year. Her projections are why my team made it home." The speaker was the man in the dark suit, retired, I realized now. But the way he sat still held the bearing of command. A former general, his words dropped like stone into water. Dad turned toward me. His voice for once wasn't dismissive. It wasn't even rehearsed. It was just small. "I didn't know," he murmured. I lifted my wine glass slowly, took a sip, let the flavor settle. Then I set it down and looked at him and said clear and even, "You never asked." The room stilled again. It wasn't a rebuke, not a shout, but it reverberated louder than anything I'd said in 3 decades. And then softly, deliberately, someone at the far end stood and clapped once. Then twice. It echoed like punctuation. Another guest joined. Then another. The sound spread slow at first, hesitant, then full. I didn't rise. I didn't bow my head. I just sat, letting them reclaim their dignity. The only way they knew how, by finally giving mine back. I didn't slam the door. I didn't say goodbye. But no one called me invisible as I walked out either. The foyer was quiet now, stripped of its earlier orchestration. The party had unraveled behind those thick double doors, dissolving into half-finished conversations. Clinking glasses, dulled by awareness. In this space, framed by marble floors and designer mirrors, I finally felt the absence of noise like a balm. I slipped my coat on slowly, fingers brushing the lining. The report Jonathan had tucked into my pocket earlier still rested there, folded with care. A symbol, a salute, a proof that didn't need announcing. Wind whispered outside, brushing against the mansion's facade. One porch light flickered, an imperfection in the curated world Charlotte tried so hard to preserve. Footsteps approached from behind, measured but firm. "I figured I'd find you here," Jonathan said, voice quiet. I turned. He wasn't in uniform, not really, but the way he carried himself tonight, all precision and restraint, he might as well have been. In his hand, he held a slim folder, not sealed, not classified anymore, newly declassified. He said, offering it to me, "The original. Your signature is on page 9. I thought you might want it. For your next student." I took it, not needing to look. I knew every line by heart. "Thanks," I said simply. Behind him, the front door opened, and Sarah stepped inside. She didn't smile, didn't say anything right away, just nodded once, eyes catching mine with that steady, unshakable trust she always carried. "Well played, ma'am," she said, and I could hear the faint edge of pride tucked behind her usual stoicism. Marilyn appeared in the hallway, then froze at the sight of me. She didn't speak, only hovered a woman, unsure whether to confront or retreat. Her pearls sat askew, her expression tight with calculations she could no longer control. Charlotte emerged next, hair slightly tousled, makeup no longer flawless. The sheen of control had dulled. She opened her mouth. I raised a hand. Not tonight. She froze and for once obeyed. Jonathan stepped back, giving me room. Sarah moved beside me like she belonged there, because she did. I turned once more toward the interior of the house. The chandelier shimmered faintly in the distance, casting warped shadows. Beyond that, the table, the framed photos, the applause that came too late. I don't live here, I said quietly to Jonathan. I never did. Then I stepped through the door and into the night. The wind was cool, brisk, almost bracing. Sarah held the car door open, keys already in hand. As we reached the bottom of the steps, she glanced over. Drink. I looked at her sideways. Whiskey's on me, she added. Only if you let me pick the battle next time. She smiled. Deal. And we disappeared into the night, not as ghosts, but as commanders of our own silence. My father once told me I was a clever girl who wouldn't last in the real world. His letter began with, Dear General Carter. The envelope sat on my desk like it didn't belong. Cream-colored standard size, addressed in familiar blocky penmanship. My full name was written out, not Becky, not Miss, not even just Rebecca. And for a long moment, I didn't touch it. The base was quiet, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead, blending with the distant bark of a drill sergeant finishing up night watch. I picked up the envelope, dated 2 days after the party, postmarked from Massachusetts. No return address, but I knew that writing, I'd seen it in margins of forgotten school permission slips and notes taped to the fridge that always ended with, Don't touch my tools. Inside one folded page, Dear General Carter. The words looked foreign in his hand, like someone else had guided it. I read slowly, eyes trailing each hesitant loop. I don't know how to start this. Maybe I should have said something sooner. Maybe I should have looked closer. Maybe I just didn't know what I was looking at. My fingers trembled, but I kept reading. You never made noise. That was the problem, Charlotte demanded. You adapted. I thought that meant you were fine. I didn't realize silence could mean something else. A breath caught in my throat. I set the letter down, stepped away, then returned, like it had magnetized me. I watched you leave that night, and for the first time, I saw you. He didn't apologize. Not directly. There were no dramatic declarations, no pleas, just a series of small confessions stitched together by someone who had finally realized the shape of his absence. I thought you wouldn't last in the real world. Turns out, it's the world that couldn't keep up with you. It ended plainly. You don't have to write back. I just needed you to know. I see you now. I folded the letter once, twice, held it tight in my palm. My phone buzzed a voice memo from Sarah. I hit play. You don't owe him a reply, her voice said softly. Reading it is enough. Burning. It's fair too. I smiled faintly. Of course she knew. I didn't reply to the memo. Instead, I walked to my filing cabinet and pulled out a lighter from the emergency kit. The letter flared bright, then dimmed to ash in the metal trash bin. But one line, I'd clipped it before lighting the match. I see you now. I pinned it to the corkboard above my desk. Just beneath it, I scribbled a post-it and pressed it into place. Let them see, but don't wait to be seen. The knock came lightly. I turned. A young sergeant stood in the doorway. Uniform, impeccable posture. Nervous? Ma'am, she said. A request just came in from West Point. They want you to lecture. I nodded once, voice even. Tell them I accept. Charlotte once said the bracelet looked cheap. Now she mailed it back in a velvet box. No note. The mailroom was quiet, fluorescent lights, humming like an old memory. I signed for the small package without thinking, expecting field gear or a restock of encrypted tags. But the return address was unfamiliar. No name, just a Boston P.O. box. I turned it over once, then again. The clerk raised an eyebrow. That's all for today, ma'am. I nodded. Tucking the package under one arm, snow had begun to fall outside, fine as powdered sugar. The kind that didn't stick, just dusted the ground with the idea of winter. Back in my office, I shut the door behind me, set the box on my desk, and stared at it like it might hiss. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't grand. Just precise. A velvet square no bigger than my palm. I opened it slowly. Inside, nestled against the deep blue fabric, was the bracelet. The silver one I'd lost. No bin told I lost at summer camp when I was 10. A thin, delicate thing with a small compass charm and the faintest etching of my initials on the clasp. I remembered how Charlotte had scoffed when she saw it once. "Looks like something from a cereal box," she'd said. "Too small for you anyway." But here it was. The charm had been polished, the clasp replaced. It looked cared for. There was no note, not even a slip of paper with her handwriting. But I knew it was from her. The absence of words was signature enough. I picked it up carefully, turning it over in my fingers. It didn't fit now, hadn't in years. My wrists had thickened with time training consequence, but it wasn't meant to be worn. The door creaked, just a gust of wind from the hallway. I set the bracelet down beside a framed tactical map of Operation Cold Moon, the same map I used in briefings, the same mission that changed everything. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. She sent it. Brave in her own way, I stared at the screen, then at the bracelet again. Charlotte hadn't apologized. Not once. But she hadn't thrown it away either. I whispered. "You didn't understand, but you kept it. That counts for something." The room was quiet, the snow beyond the window dancing in lazy spirals. I sat down, letting the silence wrap around me. Then an email ping. Subject guest lectureship. Confirmation from you. Military Academy, West Point. To General Rebecca Carter. Course title, Adaptive Command and Emotional Intelligence. I leaned back in my chair, fingers brushing the bracelet once more, then turned to face the future. They didn't stand for my rank. They stood because I made them rethink what leadership sounded like. The oak-paneled lecture hall smelled faintly of polish and paper, the kind of old reverence that clung to military institutions. Rows of stiff uniforms sat alert under the high, vaulted ceiling, their name tags catching the light like quiet declarations. I stood at the front, not behind the lectern, but beside it. No podiums today, no barriers. I scanned the faces. Young, sharp, expectant. Most of them had already Googled me. No doubt, the truth, or at least its digital fragment, had traveled fast. But I wasn't here to replay headlines. I began without introduction. "No salutes," I said, holding their gaze. "Save your respect for the woman beside you, who doubts herself and still shows up." The room shifted. Shoulders straightened, but breaths eased. Sarah had dropped me off earlier that morning. She didn't stay, just leaned on the car window and said, "Your battlefield, your rules." I'd nodded, feeling more exposed in my dress blues than I ever had in desert fatigues. Now I clicked the remote and brought up a single slide. A heat map from Operation Cold Moon. No names, just the contours of terrain, threat proximity, and escape vectors. "This," I said, "is what empathy looks like when rendered in data." I didn't explain further. I let them lean in. I walked them through the mission, not with jargon, but with cause and cost. How one slight delay, one unnoticed hesitation in a junior analyst's voice had altered a command decision. How pausing to ask why she sounded different rewrote a team and saved lives. How leadership wasn't just about barking orders, but noticing the cracks before someone fell through. Halfway through, Cadet Reyes raised her hand. Her posture was military perfect, but her eyes reminded me too much of mine at 20. "What if they still don't see us?" "Ma'am," I paused. The room was still. "Then see each other," I said. "That's where it starts. Visibility isn't granted. It's practiced. First here, then out there." I saw Morris, a senior cadet, in the front row, shift slightly, his pen pausing mid-note. Another slide came up. This time, no data. Just a quote from an after-action review I'd once redacted myself. "Operative maintained cohesion through calm under fire." Beneath it, my own annotation. "Leadership is quiet until it has to be loud." I turned back to them. "We are trained to endure," I said, voice soft. "But that's not the same as being silent." Then I stepped away from the screen, walked toward the chalkboard, picked up a stick of white chalk, let it screech faintly across the surface as I wrote, "Visibility is not validation. Earned truth needs no spotlight." A hush, then movement. Morris stood first, not rushed, not dramatic, just deliberate. Then Reyes, then row by row the entire hall rose. They weren't clapping. They didn't have to. The act of standing was enough. A recognition not of rank, but resonance. I nodded once, tucked the chalk back into its tray, and turned to face them fully. "Class dismissed. For the first time in a long time, I saw myself in a frame, and I wasn't half a shoulder. The envelope lay on my desk, thick with intent. No return address, but the handwriting was Jonathan's. That angled, deliberate script that always looked like it belonged on debriefing documents rather than birthday cards. I opened it with my letter knife, not out of ceremony, but habit. Inside, wrapped in matte tissue, was a wooden frame, understated, smooth, the kind that didn't beg for attention, but earned its place quietly. The photo inside stopped me. Me and Cadet Reyes, standing side by side in the West Point lecture hall. She was mid-laugh, head tilted slightly toward me, like the universe had finally given her permission to exhale. And I wasn't cropped or shadowed. I was centered, clear, present, beneath the image in Jonathan's neat script. For when you forget, they're looking now. I sat back in my chair, letting the moment settle. The lamp on my desk cast a soft glow, catching the edges of my cooling coffee and the open files from the day's briefing. Outside, the wind pressed gently against the window pane. A reminder that the world didn't need to. They once gave me the smallest chair at the table. Now I build tables and teach others to do the same. The West Point Library was near silent. The only sounds, the soft patter of rain against arched windows and the occasional creak of a chair. My laptop glowed faintly in the quiet alcove, where I'd claimed my usual spot, far enough from the shelves to think close enough to feel history pressing in like a breath. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then I typed to the final line of the manuscript. You are not their absence. You are your own present. I sat back, exhaled. It wasn't victory that settled in my chest. Not quite. It was more like alignment, like something that had been fractured for years had quietly clicked into place. Outside, a low rumble of thunder underscored the rain. I reached for the tea Sarah had dropped off earlier, Jasmine still warm. She'd arrived with no fanfare, just a dry towel, a knowing smirk in the words. Endings aren't quiet. You know, they just pretend to be. My desk for once was almost empty. Just the manuscript, a few scattered notes, and a bookmark hand-delivered that morning by Reyes. It was made of olive wood, etched with her handwriting, for the general who never needed applause. I smiled. She hadn't stayed to explain, just slipped it onto the desk during morning drills and nodded, the same way I had once nodded to Sarah years ago, under a scorching Afghan sun. Silent understanding passed down like a compass. I sipped the tea, read the line again. Not applause, presence. Sarah returned as I was sealing the envelope thick with pages and purpose, addressed to the publishing house in Manhattan. She sat across from me, leaned on one elbow, and studied my face like I might vanish again if she blinked. You're not just a voice anymore, she said, not smiling. You're the silence that made others speak. I didn't respond, not because I disagreed, but because there was nothing left to prove. Outside the library, cadets passed in damp uniforms, heads bowed against the mist. A few glanced towards the tall windows. One spotted me and gave a sharp nod. Not a salute, just recognition. Legacy was quieter than I'd imagined. The book title was simple. The Quiet, directive subtitle, What They Forgot I Became. I carried the envelope to the outgoing mail bin myself, slipped it in without ceremony. That story finally belonged to the world. On my way out, I passed the glass case where past instructors were listed. My name had been etched into the new panel last week. Small, precise, undeniable. Outside, the rain thickened. I didn't rush. I stepped into it. I pulled off my name tag, folded it into my pocket. Let the drops find my skin. No one called me general, but every cadet I passed met my eye and nodded. Not because they were told to, but because they chose to. And that finally was enough. Be loud to shift. My phone buzzed. A text from Reyes. If I'm ever half the woman you are, I'll be enough. I stared at the message for a long beat. Then I typed back. You already are. Keep showing up. They'll follow. I placed the frame carefully beside my field medals. Not above, not below, just beside. A new edition. Equal in weight. Legacy wasn't made of brass and ceremony alone. Sometimes it was in quiet echoes and borrowed courage. I reached for a pen, slipped a note card into the frame's corner, and scribbled a single line, not the face in the frame, the force behind it. The house was quiet. The base quieter still. I opened my personal draft, the one I'd saved in scattered notes jotted across deployment flights and base bunk nights. Chapter 1. The General They Tried to Forget. The cursor blinked, I didn't hesitate. They once called her forgettable. Now even silence bowed in her presence. Justice didn't roar. It arrived like snowfall on stone, steady and undeniable, like the final chord of a long-forgotten melody. Justice may arrive late, but it resonates powerfully once it's heard. No wall of lies can stand forever against the tide of truth. If this story moved you, like, share and drop a comment. Type 1 if you've ever felt unseen but kept going. Type 2 if you think her fight still isn't over. They said they'd be right back, but the truth is, they were never coming back for me. It was already dark when the car pulled into the gravel lot. The sky hung low, swollen with October rain, and the buzz of the flickering overhead lights made everything feel more silent. Not less. The gas station sat like a forgotten outpost on Route 9, tucked behind fields of nothing. There were no other cars, no music on the radio, just the rhythmic click of the cooling engine and the quiet rustle of Hayden chewing on a juice box straw in the back seat. I didn't understand it then. Not fully, but something in me that small voice we're taught to ignore started whispering the moment my dad put the car in park. "Get out for a second, Sloan," he said, eyes still on the road ahead. His tone wasn't angry, just flat, like he was giving instructions to a stranger. My mother said nothing. She stared out the passenger window, her arms folded tightly across her chest. Rain tapped gently on the glass, like it was waiting for a cue. She didn't look at me. That, more than anything, made my chest clench. David reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a crumpled $20 bill and a folded piece of paper. "Get something to eat. We'll be back in 10. Hayden piped up from behind me. "Can I go too?" "No," David snapped, not loudly, but sharp enough to still her instantly. I opened the door. The cold air hit fast and wet, slicing through my thin denim jacket. I stepped out, gravel shifting beneath my sneakers. When I turned to shut the door, my dad's eyes flicked to me for the briefest second, and then the car was already backing up. I thought it was a joke, some weird parenting thing, a test. Maybe. I watched the red brake lights disappear onto the highway. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. My legs began to ache from standing. Rain started in slow needles. The bill in my hand turned soft. I walked inside. The clerk barely looked up. He was young, mid-20s, maybe too absorbed in a scratch lottery ticket behind the counter. I lingered near the candy aisle, pretending to choose something. Every time a car whooshed past outside, I darted to the window. Nothing stopped. 40 minutes later, the clerk glanced at me, then at the clock. "You got someone picking you up?" he asked. I nodded instinctively. My parents, they just had to turn around. He made a face skeptical, but not unkind. "You want to wait in here? You're soaked." I nodded again. He handed me a towel from behind the counter. I sat on a plastic bench near the ice cooler, my jacket dripping onto the tile, the hem sticking to my legs. An hour passed, then another. He gave me a cup of hot water and instant cocoa. I don't remember saying thank you. My throat was too tight. I just stared at the door. Eventually, he made a phone call. I heard him say, "Yeah, girl's about 13. Been here 3 hours. Doesn't seem like anyone's coming back." The note was still in my pocket. I hadn't opened it yet. The rain got heavier. The gas station smelled like burnt coffee and lemon floor cleaner. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Even with the cocoa, I clutched the edge of the bench so hard, the tips of my fingers went white. Around midnight, a police cruiser pulled up. Lights dimmed. A woman stepped out in uniform, tan windbreaker clipboard in hand. She knelt in front of me, her voice low and kind. "Hey there, sweetheart. I'm Officer Danner. Can you tell me your name?" My lips parted. For a second, nothing came out. Then Sloan Rivers. I think. She wrote it down slowly, her eyes scanning my face like I might disappear if she looked away too long. I followed her to the cruiser without resistance. The clerk gave me a sad wave as I passed. I don't even think I waved back. The inside of the patrol car was warm. It smelled like vinyl and cheap coffee. I sank into the back seat, the jacket around me heavy, useless, against the kind of cold that seeps from the inside out. The officer started the engine. Country radio played softly. Only then did I unfold the paper. 4 words, scribbled in David's exacting hand. "Some kids aren't meant to stay. It's best if you just leave." They wiped me from their existence. Yet, the truth remains on the page. Memories linger in the shadows of what we wish to leave behind. The atmosphere in the room was perpetually chilly, neither frigid nor unfriendly, merely a gentle nudge that comfort was not at the forefront of consideration. I found myself in the solitude of the secure booth, the retinal scanner pulsing amber next to me, the system poised for a choice I had already settled in my mind. Bypass the internal audit protocol. Subject Rivers, Sloan. Clearance Strategic Tier Level 9. I articulated my words with precision, allowing my voice to weave seamlessly into the machine's attentive network. A short pause. Then the screen emitted a cold, clinical confirmation tone. It was an odd sensation to encounter my name in that official typeface once more. Years of experience and quietude had taught me to wipe away traces, not to revisit them. Yet, this was not a matter of longing for the past. This centered around the truth and substantiation, truth that had gathered dust instead of igniting concern. The file seemed stripped down, almost ghostly in its simplicity. Identification. Number 1, photograph. 1 year of enrollment at West Point. Status inactive. Psychiatric instability led to the candidate being considered unfit for prolonged service. Signed and dated in May 2004. The digital signature was clear and undeniable. David R. Rivers. I gazed at it longer than necessary, not out of uncertainty, but because even after 2 decades, a part of me remained hopeful that it might belong to someone else. I reclined, my fingers interlaced, allowing the weight of the situation to permeate the atmosphere around me. David hadn't merely walked away from me. He had gone to great lengths to ensure that the system erased all traces of my existence within it. He hadn't broken me. He had erased me from his life. The soft light from the monitor traced the contours of my jawline. I reached into the inner pocket of my coat and pulled out a folded slip of paper, a handwritten log I'd noted earlier that week, listing names of individuals who might have been familiar with the old system before it was overtaken by automation. A single name bore a tiny star next to it. Fulton Charles, a former clerk, renowned for her remarkable ability to recall every detail. Whispers suggest that she once exposed a general's fraudulent citation and survived to share the tale. I discovered him in the archives annex close to Judiciary Square, hidden behind an unmarked door that had peeling paint and the lingering scent of boiled coffee. The dim glow danced uncertainly along the corridor. I rapped my knuckles against the door 2 times. Fulton. I reached out. It all hinges on who's inquiring, a voice replied from the other side, rough around the edges. Perhaps a decade removed from the game. Sloan Rivers, exploring a deletion order from 2004. Thoughtful file route. You were included in the chain of custody. A moment of stillness. Suddenly, the door swung open. He appeared more fragile than I had anticipated, his skin resembling yellowed parchment, and his stance hinted at a constant struggle against the pull of gravity. That name rings a bell, he responded right away. Yet, it's the signature that lingers in my memory more vividly. He gestured for me to follow him through aisles lined with printed logs and backup microfiche, remnants that had endured not 1 but 2 waves of digitization. We found ourselves in front of a weathered steel filing cabinet. He gently rapped on the top drawer. This section is entirely analog. In those days, if you wished for someone to disappear, there were 2 essentials: a signature and stillness. I stood by, watching him sift through the glossy pages of the logs. He selected one and placed it down gently. The notation struck me as familiar right away. Identical operations code. As the file I removed, his finger hovered just beside it. On that day, he quietly remarked that he had flagged the request. It was puzzling. Young cadet, especially with no psychological indicators beforehand, and the writer bypassed the established protocol. David Rivers. I completed it on his behalf. Fulton gave a slight nod. I had no idea that name held any significance for you. Indeed, it did. He was my dad. He did not.